Diplomatic situations reaching a boiling point tonight. President Trump threatening to shut down the southern U.S. border as a caravan of thousands of Central American migrants heads towards the U.S. tonight. Mexico is turning to the United Nations for help. Could the U.S. military soon be lining our border? And patients wearing thin amid an international outcry over the fate of missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Tonight, brand new moves from the Trump administration as the president says it certainly looks like Khashoggi is dead. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon BREAM in Washington. We've got team coverage tonight. Kristen Fisher following the latest on the Trump administration's reaction to the Khashoggi case. But we begin with Trace Gallagher tracking that migrant caravan from our LA newsroom. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. At last check, the caravan of roughly 4,000 Honduran and Salvadoran migrants was in Guatemala, about 150 miles from the Mexico border. Mexican police and military say anyone without a passport, visa, or other documents will be turned away or detained. And breaking tonight, a senior administration official tells Fox News the U.S. and Mexico have agreed on how to deal with the caravan, saying the Mexican government will put up shelters along the Mexico-Central American border so they can vet the migrants to find out which ones have a legitimate claim for refugee status. Here's the Mexican ambassador to the U.S. on special report. Watch.
If somebody's seeking asylum, Mexico is there along now with the UN to look at those claims. We want to make sure that those claims are legitimate.
But it's also important to note the only thing separating Guatemala from Mexico are two bridges and a river. If this caravan decides to conduct a mass crossing, Mexico has historically shown little ability to stop them. So experts say by this weekend, much of the caravan could be in Mexico moving north. Tonight in Montana, President Trump doubled down on where the buck stops. Watch.
I'm willing to send the military to defend our southern border if necessary. All caused because of the illegal immigration onslaught brought by the Democrats because they refuse to acknowledge or to change the laws. They like it.
Mexico and the U.S. also agreed on a plan B for the caravan, which is that if any migrants make it into the U.S., Mexico will allow those persons to be returned to Mexico. Until now, the U.S. has been forced to house them until they go before an immigration judge. And while there's a major focus on this 4,000-person caravan, the Border Patrol says 4,000 migrants cross into the U.S. every 4 days. And because of the current political climate of not detaining families, here's what happens to migrants with children. Listen.
We have to basically let them go outside our front door, or we transport them to places where they can get shelter and they can get help.
Yeah. The Border Patrol says families want to get caught because they know they won't be detained. Bottom line, part of this caravan will likely make it into the U.S. before the midterms. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Tonight, the Trump administration warning Saudi Arabia as the president concedes that missing Washington Post contributor Jamal Khashoggi is likely dead. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is tracking the details. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in tone in the administration's strategy towards Saudi Arabia. They're still urging the world to wait and see what the investigation finds. But today, we saw its first public rebuke of the Saudi regime over the disappearance and likely murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin pulled out of a high-profile investment summit in Riyadh next week, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo set a deadline for when the Saudi investigation must be complete. He says they have a few more days, and that's it. All this as President Trump took the important step of saying for the first time that he believes Khashoggi is dead.
It's that way to me. It's very sad. It certainly looks that way.
Well, speaking on the tarmac before boarding Air Force One, President Trump also used his toughest language yet when asked what the U.S. response would be if the Saudis were indeed behind the murder of this journalist.
Well, it'll have to be very severe. I mean, it's bad stuff. But we'll see what happens. Okay? Thank you.
According to the New York Times and other overseas media outlets, Saudi Arabia is considering pinning the blame for Khashoggi's disappearance on General Ahmed al-Asiri, a high-ranking intelligence officer and advisor to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Several other suspects in Khashoggi's disappearance have also been linked to the Crown Prince, which is why even some members of the president's own party say just waiting for the results of this internal investigation by the Saudis will never be good enough.
Whether the Crown Prince had a role, I think, is the key question here. And I agree that we shouldn't just rely just on a Saudi investigation. We should have our intelligence community and FBI look into this.
And in another bizarre twist, Turkish media is reporting that one of the Saudi suspects believed to be behind Khashoggi's disappearance was killed today in a car crash in Riyadh. Now, Saudi Arabia, it does have an unusually high rate of failed car accidents, but still, Shannon, you can't deny that this timing is highly suspicious.
Yeah, a lot of people have questions about that. We'll continue to dig. All right, thank you very much, Kristen.
You bet.
All right, you heard President Trump warn of severe punishment for Saudi Arabia if its rulers are found to be directly involved in the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But exactly what is this administration willing to do, and what should it do if that turns out to be the case? Let's talk with retired four-star general and Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, welcome.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Good to see you as well. Where do we go from here with this case? What could the U.S. do if we do ultimately discover there is a connection as alleged?
Well, let's see where we are. First of all, the visit by Secretary Pompeo was absolutely critical. He brought back regrettable news, certainly, that Khashoggi is dead. Also, I think he has flat told the president that indeed Saudi officials are culpable, but we don't know what level is involved yet. And I think he's also told the president that the Saudi leadership clearly understands how serious the United States is taking this issue, how President Trump is taking this very seriously, and how our Congress is. And I believe he's got a message from the king and from the Crown Prince that they're going to move rapidly to conduct a complete and thorough investigation. Will have full accountability, and that means it's going to be done in days as opposed to weeks. I believe what that has produced is a decision on the part of the president, obviously to not permit Mnuchin to go to the to Saudi Arabia, but secondly, to reserve judgment now until that investigation is complete. Listen, our administration knows just as well as you and I know that the Saudis for almost 2 weeks have denied the fact that Khashoggi was involved in foul play inside that consulate. In fact, they said that he left the same day he entered. So there's great skepticism about this investigation that's coming in terms of its accuracy and in terms of its credibility. The whole world will wait to get that news, to include our president and our Congress.
I want to play something from Congressman Michael McCaul. He happens to be the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee. What he says about our relationship with Saudi Arabia in this context.
We don't expect this from our allies. It's deeply disturbing and troubling to me because I know the Crown Prince very well. I've met with him on several occasions with the Speaker of the House.
Okay, so what does this do to our relationship with Saudi Arabia and the alliances that are very important to what's going on there, our interests as well as theirs?
Yes, certainly, and that's a great question, and it's an important question, certainly, to consider. Well, first of all, this is a serious setback to the relationship. Make no mistake about that. Also, the reality is that the relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States is in the U.S. national interest. And that will also guide us in terms of what we're going to do about this. Obviously, I believe there'll be severe punishment meted out by the United States. I would think right now, as we're talking, Shannon, excuse me, as we're talking, the President of the United States National Security Team is looking at the options that are available, a wide array of options. And I'm sure they're bringing in the economic and financial advisors to deal with sanctions. And I would hope that they're working with the congressional leadership, because if we can do this together, the executive branch and the congressional branch, the impact will be that much more significant. And I think another thing that's going on, and I suspect Pompeo started this before he left the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to tell them that this relationship is going to change because of this incident, that we are going to put in place conditions that will govern this relationship in the future, particularly in terms of transparency, full disclosure, so that we can rebuild trust again.
Yeah, there are going to be some bridges that probably need to be rebuilt, although some out there would like to see them completely blown up. We'll see. General Keane, thank you very much.
Good talking to Shannon.
All right, we're now inside 20 days to the midterm elections. With so much on the line, President Trump tonight throwing his weight behind GOP Senate hopeful Matt Rosendale. But as so often happens when the stakes are this high, the president is bound to say something that raises eyebrows. Correspondent Peter Ducey is live now with all the details from tonight's rally out in Montana. Good evening, Peter.
Shannon, tonight President Trump picked the thing that he wants or he thinks can get Republican voters energized now that the Kavanaugh confirmation process is over. He said this is going to be the election of the caravan, referring, of course, to that huge group of Central American children making their way for the southern border. There was also a ton of talk about the tone Democrats have taken as they try to win back control of Congress, and with that came a new slogan.
The choice could not be more clear. Democrats produce mobs. Republicans produce jobs.
Congressman Greg Gianforte was in the House tonight. President Trump joked about him body slamming a reporter during his last campaign, and the crowd cheered as loud as they did all night. But the candidate who brought Trump to Montana, Senate hopeful Matt Rosendale, challenging Democratic incumbent Senator Jon Tester for his Senate seat. And that means it's personal for the president, who expressed continued and long-lasting disgust with Tester for going public with unproven accusations of misconduct involving his former nominee to run the VA, Admiral Ronnie Jackson, who later withdrew under scrutiny.
I can never forget what Jon Tester did to a man that's of the highest quality.
What he did was unfair. What he did was vicious.
I had a chance to ask Senator Tester about the president's criticism earlier today, and he insisted he didn't make up anything about Jackson. He just repeated things that he says he was told by active duty service members and veterans. But the president clearly not satisfied by that. He accused Tester tonight of supporting open borders and accused him of being hostile to gun owners. And this Rosendale event really benefits the candidate in a way that Tester doesn't have, because the president tonight here in Missoula offered this Senate challenger a platform and a stage where there were thousands of potential voters gathered, whereas Tester hosted his own event that we went to earlier today in Butte, and it attracted just a few dozen. Shannon.
All right, Peter Ducey there on the road with the president. Thank you. Now, if you saw our program last night, you'll recall we promoted an interview with Montana's GOP Senate candidate, Matt Rosendale. He was with the president tonight. Shortly before tonight's show, the Rosendale campaign told us he's no longer available. Their explanation is that they lost touch with him after the rally with the president. The invitation is still open to him and Senator Tester as well. They've both been invited. Well, citing a lack of, quote, pure objectivity in political polling, talk radio giant Rush Limbaugh says he thinks Republicans will actually do better than expected at the polls next month.
We hold the House and we increase the Senate. And because I think that's justice. I think that's just. I think the Democrat Party deserves to lose in the single biggest electoral landslide defeat in my lifetime because of the actions they've taken just in the last month.
All right, it's time. Tonight's Power Panel, Democratic strategist Dave Brown, the Republican National Committee spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany, and the host of The Next Revolution right here on Fox News, Steve Hilton. Welcome to all of you.
Good evening.
Thanks, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Okay, so Steve, I'll start with you. Almost no polling shows that the Republicans are going to hold on to the House. So where do you think this is coming from with Rush Limbaugh? What's the strategy?
I tend to agree with him, and I think what we could be seeing is, again, the phenomenon that the polling experts call the spiral of silence. The shy Trump voters, the shy Brexit voters, the kind of people who know that it's not the dumb thing necessarily to support a particular view, but secretly in the polling booth, that's what they do. And I think that the real story of this election now is that for a while it looked like the Democrats, they were ahead in terms of firing up their base and they could rely on that. But since Kavanaugh, the Republicans have caught up. And so the election's really going to be decided in the middle, the people who aren't in either base. And actually that practical appeal, the jobs not mobs appeal, I think is exactly the kind of thing that could work for those voters in the middle who just want some good results and they're not so worried about the ideology.
All right, and Dave, we have top Democrats out there saying, hey, we think we're going to flip the House, but maybe only by 1 or 2 seats. It sounds like they're managing expectations as well. Is that so their folks don't get comfortable and stay home and don't turn out so they can have the blue wave?
Sure. Look, we obviously need voters to turn out in order to win elections, but I think the momentum for Democrats does speak for itself. I think that's proven over the past couple of years. We've carried now 43 state legislative races. We've seen special elections where Democrats are outperforming. You see the president's poll numbers just in the dumps when it comes to his favorability with particularly women voters in the suburbs, a key voting bloc for us. But yeah, Shannon, I mean, I think it would be foolish for anyone to say that we have this in the bag. I disagree with Rush Limbaugh's characterization, but I absolutely think that we're on track to take back the House, and I think we stand a very, very good shot at the Senate as well.
Well, turnout is key, especially in these midterm elections. Kayla, you know that very well. We saw in our new Fox News polling out yesterday that health care shows up as the #1 issue for most voters, and most analysts out there agree that's actually a good thing for Democrats.
Well, look, we at the Republican National Committee, our internal polling showed that no one wants socialized medicine because they know Medicare for all means, in fact, that Medicare is taken away from our seniors. So we're out there putting out that message because when it's explained to voters, they do not agree with depriving our seniors of Medicare through a Medicare for all, aka socialized medicine. That being said, you know, Dave mentioned those special elections. I would note he mentioned Democratic turnout was up, so too was Republican turnout, and we actually won 8 out of the 9 special elections for the House. So we have a pretty good track record. And I would finally add that Steve is spot on. So is Rush Limbaugh about this so-called hidden Trump voter. I talked to a pollster who said to me that in the aftermath of the election, he went out in Michigan and in California, and 37% of Trump voters said they refused to tell a pollster when they were called that they supported President Trump. 37%, that's nearly a third of the Trump voters.
Well, those would be big numbers if they bear out in this election as well. We'll know in less than 3 weeks. Let's talk about the Senate now. We've got this race in North Dakota where the current senator, the incumbent Democrat, Heidi Heitkamp, a tough week for her. Somehow a campaign ad got released and had the names of women who were alleged to be victims of some kind of sexual assault or other situation. Some of them say they never were. Others say they never authorized the use of their name. Now there's some back and forth. I want you to hear from one of the women whose name was exposed and the senator as well.
I was told that she was going to reach out to every one of the women that was, put in this without our consent, but she has yet to reach out to me.
I can only say this is a terrible mistake. And the last thing I would ever want to do would be to cause trauma for any victim of violence. My parents taught me that if I made a mistake, my obligation was to take responsibility and then to try and make things right.
I mean, Kayla, she's very contrite and admits this was a huge disaster. Will the apology be enough?
It will not be enough. And Shannon, right before I came on with you, I actually watched that interview in its entirety. And that poor girl, do you know how she found out that her name was outed via Heidi Heitkamp's letter? A friend called her and said, I read about your sexual assault in an article. That is how that young woman found out that her name was released to the public. An apology that is public is not enough. Heidi Heitkamp needs to pick up the phone right now and call that young girl and apologize for getting her name in the national headlines.
Yeah, and Dave, there are more than 125 women or so. They say that they are trying to make those overtures and reach out. This was already a tough race for her. The polling has not been well for Heitkamp. Is this the end of her campaign?
No, it's not, Shannon. What happened is obviously just really disappointing, and I think the senator has been correct to apologize the way she has, and I agree. I hope she is able to reach out to every single person affected. But no, this isn't the end of her campaign for the simple reason that the North Dakotans need to ask the question, who is going to fight for them in the Senate? And when you compare Senator Heitkamp's record as a fighter, as a lifelong North Dakotan, to her opponent, who voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and in so doing also voted to strip people with pre-existing conditions from protections, insurers being allowed to dump them had that bill actually passed the Senate. This is the same congressman who passed a tax bill that's added now $2 trillion, or will add $2 trillion to the debt. All the while, Republicans under Mitch McConnell and with Congressman Kramer, if he's elected, now saying they want to cut Social Security, cut Medicaid, cut Medicare, hurt seniors, hurt middle-class Americans, hurt working families. So no, North Dakotans are looking at this. It is a very clear, very stark choice. They know who's going to be better off in their corner. That's Senator Heitkamp.
All right, and my understanding is when you talk about cutting, it means scaling back the increases that are already going to happen. But Steve, can Senator Heitkamp even get to the issues now in these final days of the campaign if she's having to deal with the fallout from this mistake?
No, you can't get to the issues until you've dealt with this terrible, terrible mistake that has hurt people so deeply and looks like you're trying to exploit this terrible situation that has affected people. And by the way, what we just heard was exactly why you can't get to the issues. I thought it's pretty disgusting, frankly, to just go into a set of talking points about policy without acknowledging how terrible this situation
Steve,
is.
I did just acknowledge. Steve, excuse me. Excuse me. I did just acknowledge it.
You did not.
I did,
You
Steve.
went straight
Steve,
to
I said this. What happened was very unacceptable, and I'm glad that the senator apologized, and I hope that she completes the phone call. So please, Steve, do not put words in my mouth. That's complete crap.
You couldn't wait. You couldn't wait.
Steve, that is
to
ridiculous.
Get to the political
that is
talking
ridiculous.
Point. And it was really disgusting.
Oh, I'm sure that's
everyone
very,
can
very
surely
sincere.
agree
You're discussing sincere.
that this is a human situation.
Come on.
Not a political one.
Come on.
All right.
And I couldn't believe that you did that.
We got to leave it
Steve.
there. This is going to be a hard thing for her now because she knows she has to talk about this on the campaign trail and debates and everywhere else. We'll see how it turns out in less than 3 weeks. Thank you all tonight for being part of our Power Panel.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
See you again soon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, our countdown to the midterms continues. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi could once again be calling the shots, and that prospect is figuring heavily into key races. Plus, we'll continue the debates. Is Rush right? Is there any chance the GOP holds the House despite so many indicators suggesting otherwise? We will break down some key House races that you should be watching with our own expert, politics editor, Chris Steyerwalt.